Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. And it's a lot of fun. I have not given this talk in the class. Usually something like that, a form of that is a conference talk. So I'm adopting today. But I've been with StitchFix for about a year, and funny enough, I actually came from Accenture before. So those guys are not somebody I first met. It's been a while. So what I do at StitchFix is I lead a data science team, and in particularly we focus on styling part. So I'll have a little bit more about what StitchFix is in this presentation, so I'm not going to go ahead of myself. But yeah, so StitchFix is the fashion company, and currently it's a fashion styles for women, but we are doing a private beta for men now. So coming up in October or November this year is when we're going to launch the men's services as well. And so today, let's see which way I pointed. Okay, so today I want to focus on a few lessons that we learned, or our team learned during our time at StitchFix, is that we work with evaluating humans, right? And then in general, the difference of StitchFix compared to many other subscription services is the services are human curated. So we have our inventory, and those are basically different styles, apparel, non-apparel. And then we have our clients, and then there is a human in between that helps them to select the style, and then send them to their houses. So I guess today I want to talk about the two lessons we learned in evaluating humans. And there's more than one way to measure a human, and we'll go through that. And then scaling that measurement, scaling the performance management from 10 to thousands of humans is actually very non-trivial. And so I'll go over how we solve that problem and currently working on it. So what is StitchFix? A big question. It's a subscription service. It's a fashion service for women, currently, and men soon. So what you do is you create your profile, and then you get 5 items that are handpicked for you by your personal stylist. And then once you receive them in the comfort of your house, you keep what you like, and then whatever you don't like, you can just send back. And it's a very effortless process. You get a return envelope, you just drop it at the post office, and so forth. Oh, I'm not sure why it's not working. So I might actually be looking. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's just fix it now. There you go.
So as a customer, when you go through this process, you start with creating a style profile, and we ask you a lot of questions. We ask you, like, how old are you? What's your occupation? What's your preference in clothing? Do you like tight-fitted clothes or straight? Or do you like it oversized? We ask things like, would you prefer to add more, for example, glamorous clothes or clothes that you want to wear for a special occasion, or do you want more casual and things like that? So the style profile is very extensive, and it helps us to start you with the service. But when we pick the 5 items, a lot of times we are not only considering a style profile, but we also consider in the history. And so what StitchFix does is, like, when you actually receive your items and you kept whatever you like and send something back, you go through a feedback kind of collecting process, whether it's through on a website or application, as on a checkout process. So our clients tell us if something that what they like was a good fit or wasn't a good fit, right? Was the price okay? Was the size okay? Was the style okay? Like, we ask them a lot of feedback. So that's what makes StitchFix special, and that what makes data science at StitchFix very special, because we get a lot of information from our clients, and it helps us to evaluate every single process that we go through, from what items we buy, right? How do we distribute it across different warehouses, as well as what people we hire, how do we give them a feedback on their work, and then, of course, how do we keep our clients happy? Yes.
So with these recommendation engines that require some learning, right, the more data you can have up front, usually the quicker you can facilitate adoption and the more accurate the predictions will be. So, when Amazon started off, they wanted people to manually enter the books they already had, and Netflix wanted people to manually enter the movies they had already seen and already liked. And we also learned that kind of revealed preferences are always better than stated preferences. So did StitchFix consider ways of ingesting kind of information about people's historical choices in bricks and mortar world prior to signing up for StitchFix, like facilitating whether it be scanning or photographing or some other way of finding out what people already had and already liked?
Yeah, great question. So currently, obviously, we don't scan other people's browsing history or their purchasing of their credit card or anything like that. But of course, we have, during the sign-up process, when you look at style profile, we give a lot of visual cues and textual cues so that we can look at the preferences there. And then our also promise as a company to our clients is that if we don't hit it, if we don't hit a mark on the first try, it gets better because you give us a feedback, right? And so we have a strong team of data scientists, especially on the recommendation side, where we learn. We have a lot of interesting algorithms that we actually internally develop that help us with this kind of a cold start problem. However, I don't even really consider it cold start. I think the amount of information our clients sharing with us is actually quite phenomenal. And then for us, it actually happens really quickly where we figure out how to match those preferences. So, but it's a great point, and we have something in development internally in terms of interacting with our clients. So, can't comment on that yet. But our data science team is one of the largest in the world. So people work in all kinds of initiatives as far as client information and client profile, and you can think of gamifications and things like that. So. So I guess in the essence, StitchFix is about personal styling, and our team in particularly kind of goes in the middle of it. So a styling team at StitchFix, we have people who work on recommendation systems. We have people who work on evaluating the stylist and their performance and the impact on the client. And then we have people who work on kind of matching, human computation. How do you match stylist and the client to make the best outcome possible, right? Hypothetical idea could be if somebody lives in California, a client, right, and the stylist lives in California, they might have some affinity right there. So people in California might understand Californian style much better than somebody who lives in Florida, for example, and never been in California. So things like that. So we work a lot on the affinity finding, on measuring human performance on the recommendation side of StitchFix. And so to give you some idea who StitchFix stylists are and how we recruit them, so a lot of the service economy, and right now it's kind of on the news, we differentiate by actually having all of our stylists as our part-time employees. So they're not contractors, right? So we actually go through extensive hiring process, and they are all remote workers. So they work at home, and internally we build a platform for them to help them to work from home. So they log in, and they have client information, they have inventory information, and then they put two things together. They also have a flexible schedule. So they are part-time, so they commit to a certain number of hours, but they can work at any time, right? So they don't directly interact with the client, so they can work at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm exaggerating, but they usually work normal business hours. But some people can log in and log out anytime they like. And the other thing is they are not commission-based, so we don't want them to be a salespeople, right? We don't want them to truly provide a service to our clients. So they're fixed and non-commission-based pay, and then we'll help them to by giving them a feedback to grow them within their roles. And so internally, we basically, people who are with us for a long time, we think about them as a specialized stylist. We train them and invest actually a lot in their career development. Yes?
Are they evaluated based on the number of items returned?
Not necessarily, yeah.
Once you match a stylist to a customer, and customer keeps returning stuff, will you match this customer with another stylist, or this customer is stuck with a stylist?
So we actually, this is we have a core team that's actually solving this problem. When is the good time to break a relationship? When is the good time to keep the relationship, right? So we do a lot of that. We run a lot of experiments. And for those of you who are a client of StitchFix, we perhaps even sometimes ask you, do you want to keep your stylist? Are you satisfied? And so we study kind of the affinities in many different ways and using different metrics. So, I mean, obvious metric, like as you said, number of items returned. But there's other consequences that are outside of the stylist control, right? Like that make people keep or return certain items. So we want to be very objective when we're evaluating. Yes?
Why do you need stylists at all? Preferences too.
Right. So a great question, right? So I don't know how many of you have experience with recommendation systems. When things like that, when you basically, even the state-of-the-art algorithm, right, you really quickly fall into feedback loop, right? Even think about example with this recent Microsoft bot, right? Like you put it out on Twitter and it learned something and got into feedback loop, right? So when you have a stylist there, it basically helps us in two ways. First, it helps us to really diversify our knowledge about our inventory because the stylist will send out things that not necessarily in the top 5 recommendation of the algorithm. It will use a lot, and then second one, it will use a lot of ambient information that machines cannot process yet, right? So the idea is, what is the best outcome of any kind of personalization? And for StitchFix, the way we think is a combination of art and the science, right? And so the science is like your algorithms, your route calculations. Like, for example, I'm a stylist, right? And let's say I had 50 clients. Of course, I might have a very great memory, and I can think about, well, I sent 20 of that type of short, and like 10 times the return, and most of the people who are maybe size small say it's too big, right? And that's my route calculation I'm doing in my head, and that's most of us are doing on our day-to-day basis. Now, why do we want human to do that? We don't. We have machines who can like calculate this for everybody, right? And so this is the idea. We allow machines to do all of the route calculations, all of the recommendations, taking a lot of structured data or unstructured data, but modified for machine understanding. And then we have a human there to understand a lot of ambient information. What if the person has a specific occasion? What if they have a specific preference or request that machine might not be able to interpret right away? And then they can look at like previous history and think about maybe certain items would be a better match just based on maybe a relationship they built together and things like that. So there's a clear and strong value for a human in that loop. And the way we kind of think about it is just maximizing happiness there between a human and machine, or minimizing the friction. And that's kind of how our philosophy as a data science team works, yes?
So do stylists then have direct access to clients in order to ask questions, in order to further refine the data they're using to make that recommendation?
No, right now. No, our promise is effortless, right? So for human, right, or for our client, effortless means I sign up for a service, and then in some time, I receive a box with items select personalized for me. And I just give you some feedback in a very effortless way. Like, there's very little communication. And so, like, one of the ideas there, and like, I know our clients actually value that a lot. So, of course, it's not for everyone. And then there's other services. Like, you can go to Nordstrom, for example, and get a personal shopper where, like, you have this 2-3 hour interaction and go through the shopping experience. So our kind of value promise there is that there's minimal interactions besides like what comments you give to your stylist. Now the stylist himself or herself, they will give you a styling advice, right? So the whole communication goes kind of, they will write in why they select certain items. So there is a level of communication, and they ask questions and things like that, and client responds back as they leave feedback. So that's kind of the way it goes. But we don't use any like third channels or anything for communication. Another question? No?
You said these are some of the things that machines can't do yet.
Yeah.
So are you learning on what the stylists are doing with the intention of automating many of these things? I mean, I think this is sometimes referred to as the serendipity problem in some other recommendation engines, right? And so a lot of recommendation engines, they've built in kind of a automated serendipity factor once they've kind of observed how humans do things serendipitously.
So my personal opinion, like the artificial intelligence currently, it's advancing, but I don't think it's anywhere close to have ability to understand the ambient information. And so for us, we don't see anytime soon replacing a human with machine, and the serendipity is a great example kind of what we've been discussing. And even with the state of the art, let's say you take some image data, right? You process the image and maybe you find something very similar in your inventory. But with fashion, a lot of things are changing very fast. And humans, especially, this is not just like a mechanical Turk. Those are very highly trained individuals that are not getting paid like a 1 cent per task, right? And so they have a lot of understanding of like where the client is at this particular point of time, right? And so we do give them a lot of evidence of why algorithms selected certain items, right? But then we want them to make these decisions based on their expertise. So I hope that answered your question. Okay, so I guess when we wanted to, yes?
Sorry, if stylists aren't able to ask any questions of the client, what are the forms of data that they're able to capture from clients that aren't as easily digestible by machines? What's in typical data points?
Well, for example, our clients might leave us particular requests that sometimes could be interpreted by machine, but sometimes not, and we don't want to take that chance, right? We want a human to look at it. So our clients tell us a lot of personal information about themselves, and I mean, if you do some research about StitchFix, you can read the stories on the blogs or anywhere other people writing about personalized touch of StitchFix, and we would like to keep it that way. Now, of course, as machines advance, we'll think about how to incorporate, like as I said, like minimizing the friction between art and science and machine and human. How do you incorporate that information where we can, machine just can process it sooner, and then we stylists will come in and then take this data in and then think about like whether they made a mistake or not, right? But so far, like I say, on the level of service, I haven't seen the state-of-the-art of algorithm where I can say 100% we can eliminate human from this picture. Yeah. Okay, so I guess when we're trying to measure stylists, because those are humans, right? There are lesser of CPUs that get used or memory consumed. We want to create a process that is truthful, insightful, and functional. And the reason behind that is that we want to want to give them an honest feedback. And then we want the feedback being actionable, right? So it's not something that I tell you that you styled 50 clients and then you say, and so what am I supposed to do with this information? We want to give them information that helps them to grow within their profession, right? So when we tell them something, we want them to take that knowledge and basically apply and say, oh, okay, well, I need to correct that, or what I'm doing is great right now, so I should continue doing that. And kind of a functional goes in the same direction. There is a layers of people or kind of hierarchy, and I'll go into it a little later. And we want to give them information that is right for them. So, for example, if you're a manager, right, you perhaps want a different information or about performance than a stylist. And so we need to understand what kind of decisions people are making to give them that level of information. And of course, we want to be a client focused. So this is kind of a snippet of like if you're checking out on the mobile, you, for example, can give us information of how was your fix, right? Can you rate that? Are you looking forward for your next one? Like, was it personalized for you? Was the size right? And things like that. So we can use that information to give stylists a view. So our first lesson is that there are more than one way to measure humans. And basically, as we already kind of got into it, so we have this algorithmic recommendation for each client, personalized to each client. But then we have the human curation in there, right? So the question is like, what is the value out of a human there? And we want to measure that, and we want to be very much unbiased. And not only because we want to justify our business choice, right, of having a human in the loop, but it's mostly because we want to give our stylists an idea of how much did they contribute to successful experience of a client, right? And so basically, got 2 goals there is give each stylist a personalized feedback. How much of the stylist experience and knowledge and contributed to overall outcome, and so that we can coach and develop them further. And then from the organization standpoint, we are growing and we're expanding exponentially, so we want to give the organization an idea of how are operations going, like what decisions do we need to make in terms of hiring, and then, for example, expansion to different markets and so forth based on that information. So those are the 2 goals in measuring. And then kind of a naive approach, which we already kind of touched on. So one would say, like, why can't we just measure a stylist by aggregating the client feedback? So like we can say, for example, satisfied. It's an ordinal scale from 1 to 5. We can just aggregate this and give you a mean satisfaction or average satisfaction. Well, it could be nice, but there are some confounders there, right? So, for example, some stylists could be more experienced than others, right? And so their past experience with the same client or a different client can attribute to that satisfaction. There can be a seasonality, right? Like, for example, in the winter, there's a different type of clothes that we send out, and then in the summer for the most of the U.S., and a lot of different other aspects of a business, of a fashion business. And so instead of kind of running the, so we call it naive approach, we actually use a lot of model-based approach. And what we do is basically we run, in this particular case, like a linear model where we can attribute satisfaction, like if you think about satisfaction and number, we can attribute each portion of this number to a different component, for example, seasonality, or each individual stylist, okay? Yes?
So satisfaction is what? That's subjective rating, or is that kind of a churn predictor of some kind?
So in this case, I'm just taking the example of like a customer given subjective feedback, right? Now, we can have a lot of those metrics just based on checkouts, and then we can also look at churn, for example, and other things. So we have a variety of metrics that we're looking at. This is just an example of, for example, how do we make it more controlled by not just looking at pure averages, because a lot of information can be just hidden in the pure averages. This will give you still an average, but it's average of your particular impact once you accounted for other conditions of the business, right? And so that is good. And then from there on, we basically go into visualization. And what we do is kind of the mantra of data science. And as a mathematician and statistician, it was a very hard thing to take in. But at the end of the day, nobody really cares what model you use. Like, nobody really pays attention. Was it a generalized linear model, deep learning algorithm of whatever source, whatever neural net you used, or anything like that? Really, at the end of the day, we want to know how to use this information and what decisions we need to make. So we rely a lot on the data visualization, and we help business to understand like how to make the decision based on what we show. And so in this case, we basically lean a lot on the historical trends for each individual stylist so that they know, like, are they trending up or are they trending down? And in this case, we also, because we use model-based approach, we can make some level of prediction with certain confidence. So we say, based on that information, we think that this particular person might need an intervention right now, right? So a lot of really thinking is not just showing you data or showing you output of the model. It's more like, what do we need to do based on this information, and what do our managers need to tell the stylist to help them to correct, right? And then we also think about what kind of feedback and coaching we can do. If they're making certain decisions that we know are negatively affecting the outcome, we can help them to understand in which conditions they are making those decisions. And so we run a lot of data processing to get that information out and then just give people an advice. And then of course, we give them a lot of evidence there. So those are not just the numbers. A lot of people say, like, well, if it's a model, I don't understand. It seems like a black box to me. So we need an evidence. And we give them a lot of evidence to why certain things are predicted in a certain way or why certain things are looking in a certain way. Yes, question.
How much latitude do the recommendations provided to stylists give them? Is it typically fairly targeted based on what the analytics think the customer will enjoy, or is it very broad, trying to give the stylist maximum range of tools to express their recommendation?
Well, so I don't have the slide, but we have a really good slide about it. So idea of our recommendation, this is why it makes it very interesting, is our objective function is optimizing for purchase, right? So like, what is your propensity, what is the client propensity to buy this particular item, given the array of different features that this client is either exhibited or we can attribute to them based on interaction or just information in the profile, right? And so when the stylists come in, they bring their own biases, right? They not necessarily will pick the top 5 items that are there sorted by the client's propensity, right, to buy those items. So, of course, there is some level of bias correction, right? Like, people have a different affinities. Let's say, for example, somebody could be an edgy in a style, like in a lot of dark clothes, like a stylist, right? Dark clothes, like leather elements and things like that. So they might have an inclination of sending a lot of their clients in edgy styles that are not necessarily the best for the client. And so we also want to correct for that as well. And that's more kind of in the feedback loop, right? So you might think, like, if we're learning from what stylist is selecting from the client. So what makes StitchFix very interesting from data science perspective, we call it kind of like Eric Colson, our CEO, made this analogy of like a Cortez when he landed to the Americas, right? They burned the ships down. So it's the same thing for StitchFix. Our clients never interact with our inventory. The stylist are the proxy or liaison, right? So this makes it very interesting because it's not a typical e-commerce where a client goes, or something, maybe some other services where you can go and pre-select what exactly you want, right? You don't have that choice. You fully trust in your stylist. And on the data science side, our goal is to optimize for that.
So I think there's also kind of a portfolio problem here, right? Mm-hmm. So, if a stock recommendation engine, discovers that you really liked, Apple stock in your portfolio, well, the next stock you should get should probably be, from the steel business instead of from the technology business. Or if, I just bought a textbook on statistics, then I probably don't need another textbook on statistics. So if I've bought 3 black sweaters, then if you recommend another black sweater, that's probably going to be a mistake for
right.
most people, because now they need, a shirt or something. So,
yeah.
So how is that something that the algorithm would pick up, or is that something that would be baked into the common sense of the stylist? It's
both. It's definitely both. And then the idea is, like, as I say, like, algorithm can do it as much, but the stylist will have a way more conceptual, kind of latent understanding, right, of the customer preferences. And then kind of your question about serendipity goes into that too, right? Like, it's kind of like, where do you feel safe with what customer likes, and where you can go and push customer one direction or another. Yes, questions?
Yeah. So going back to your previous point, saying what is the value that the stylist is adding in your entire value chain? So have you done any kind of tests, meaning that for randomizing customers, sending a few people what the algorithm is recommending, and sending the stylist recommended to some, and then comparing the satisfaction scores?
Yeah, great question. We do a lot of different tests. Unfortunately, I cannot comment on exact type of tests for this group, but we test a lot of different ways, and affinity, as I mentioned, and affinities, and where a stylist is in this whole process. So definitely test-oriented. Unfortunately, cannot comment on the particular ways we do certain things. Yeah.
But can you comment on whether what you've seen, meaning that do they really add a lot of value, or like what is the difference between just depending on machine and the combination of both?
Well, so our plan is not to remove stylists from the Well, but that's just, I mean, this is as much as I could tell you right now. Like, we're not planning to roll up and have the machine completely power StitchFix business. We're actually growing. We have over 2,000 stylists now, so we're still hiring stylists because they are valuable to us. Yeah.
So it seems like a big part of what you guys are trying to do, and maybe I'm just really slow and that was obvious, is that you're trying to teach the stylists how to be better, right? Is that right?
Well, not only teach them how to be better, we want to help them to become an expert, right? So better is, there's also a lot of like relative terms, like we're not necessarily stacking up stylists and comparing them to each other, right? We want to help them to understand what is their personal impact on the client's experience and how can we get the information, learn from perhaps something that we know, like a best behavior, right? And that maybe in quotation, of something that they're doing and something that they're selecting. It's kind of like we can correct the bias of the algorithm, right? Like knowing if there are certain patterns that certain stylists are doing and then injecting their own preference. So for example, what happens when they pick from the bottom, but that item is still very successful for that particular client? That means that they know something more about that client. So we're looking at how can we extract that kind of like different types of behavior so that we can attribute it to a stylist what they know, and then we will take that information and say, like, maybe we can train other stylists, or maybe we can rebuild our platform to help others to discover that insight that the stylist kind of intuitively knows. Did that help a bit to answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a yes, but not.
Well, I don't want to say, like, we do not compare a stylist one to another, right? And that's like a big...
I guess what you're trying to do is just make each one better.
Exactly. So we want to grow their expertise, and then here you have this algorithm or this platform in the middle, right? And so we have a lot of information on how they're using it. So we basically think about how can we help them with training, but also how can we modify our platform to make it better for a stylist to find the perfect items for clients. Yes?
Does the algorithm change its output at all depending on the stylist, or is it always output the same recommendations based on the client?
So that would be... For that particular, so it's not necessarily, I understand what you're asking. So your question was like, is the algorithm right now currently personalized for a stylist and the client? The answer would be only for a client right now. The idea is like you can take the stylist bias and the information there, but our objective function is for the propensity of that client to buy. So that stylist biases can go into the model, but the model's objective function is not that, yes.
So, just on the other side, have you done experiments to understand what is the value that the recommendation engine is bringing?
So, we do have a lot of research in that. Actually, I don't know if you're familiar with our tech blog. We have some writing on the tech blog on how we can think about attributing, like thinking about all these different variables. So we call them, and sometimes you can describe them as instrumental variables, where you can try to learn the causation, like there's certain, what is the value add of the algorithm, like especially as we develop the new algorithms, so like you can test them out against each other and see in the typical business kind of metric scenario, but you can also see, given other attributes of the business, a certain clientele markup, seasonality, et cetera, what is the role of algorithms? So we do extensive analysis, so you're welcome to go on our blog to read about some of the approaches that we use. And then we run a lot of different tests, and again, cannot really comment in exact detail, but there is some information there in terms of how you figure out the causation and attribution of certain variables to your business outcomes. Yeah. Good questions, though. Okay, so I'll go faster. I don't want to... a lot of questions, so I'll be happy to answer them on the break. So. Okay, so if you think about operational view there, this is more for business, like on a higher level. So a lot of things are going to be rolled up, and so you can think about like how is my team doing, how's my organization doing across those different business metrics, and sometimes we connect them with our more global metrics to understand. And this is more operational work we're doing, like Do we need to hire more people? Because we spend a lot of time onboarding people, we have to make these decisions ahead of time. And so how did we scale that, right? So when we had 10 people, it was easy. We can just throw everything in Excel and, you know your people by name and a lot of like personal connection. But what happens when we start having thousands of people and a crazy hierarchy, right? Like, so we have somebody who is a VP level, right? And the managers and then the stylist. And so every person on this hierarchy needs a separate information. And then the question is like, not only what kind of information do they need, how much granularity do they need in this process? And so for us there, basically, we started with the core objective as decision making, and then we decided to build kind of the understanding of all of these metrics from model point of view as well as from human point of view, and thinking how do we put them together into like one beautiful, visualized, beyond the report, I'd say, view. And so kind of our question was like, do we need to build this internally or can we go to the vendors? And so we did some evaluation, and I must say that at least with the tools that we looked at, they're perfectly good, and we use them in the company for some of the dashboards and reporting. For example, Tableau we use, and Chartio we use, and Looker we use for reporting. But for this task, a lot of the questions become very custom, and we also didn't want people to explore a lot. We want really them to focus on like, what decisions do I need to make based on that data? And so it became very prohibitive for us to kind of lock it all down for them. And so after like some small deliberation, we decided to we need to enhance the user experience there, and we want a bit more of custom visualizations that are not available in those tools. And so we basically went with the stack here, and what it helped us to be very agile and really easy to develop and add more things or remove things without having extra developers that are just experts in one of those systems. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Flask or React. So Flask is more of a back end. It also serves front end, but it's a Python, very lightweight framework. A lot of data scientists can pick it up really easily and start writing services. React is more a JavaScript library, together with this D3 just to help to build the interactive there. And of course, we actually work very closely with UX and the design people so that they help us to really think about what decisions we need to make. In fact, we started with interviewing, which is not very typical for data scientists or person that like typically put some visual charts. We started with interviewing and thinking about their decision making and the process of looking at their metrics and how did they take it in. And then we went back and say, what is our goal as an organization and how we want to basically grow this organization and what metrics are important that we know from data science side. And then we combined those two together, and we did several pilots to make sure things are usable and they look right and the people understand exactly what goes on to it. So kind of the way we now ended up working with this measurement project is we have a separate kind of a model training where we use a lot of different technologies, not all of them mentioned here, but for example, we use Spark and Python and R for different model training and data aggregation and feature generation and so forth. And then the Flask and Redis, kind of we call it a data service layer, where a lot of this data basically gets massaged and put in the form so that our front-end visualization then can consume. And all of this is very separate, so what makes it easy if you want, for example, to change the data a little bit, add a new component on the front end, those are not very tightly coupled, and we can like work in parallel. And for us, like the key was to also not have just a data scientist, but have actually a data visualization expert on the team to build the visuals and really think about how do people consume the information. But all of us, for example, can work on data services layer and really kind of expose that data. And for us, it was just easy because it's very light. All of this is abstracted and separate. So for example, let's say if you're using some of the tools like Tableau, or Tableau maybe less, but let's say something like Looker that connects to your database. If your database goes down, then your product will go down, right? In this case, we can store it in many different places and ensure that there is a persistent, like Redis is just in the memory, but we have a copy of the data somewhere else. So this will never affect, like if our big database goes down, this application will stay up. So we were also, for us it was also important that there's a certain level of uptime and availability, and so people can trust it. Anyways, in conclusion, there's 2 lessons we learned. There's more than one way to evaluate a human, especially if it's a human in the loop. And then when you scale the performance management, it's very non-trivial, but it's possible. So thank you. And then we're hiring not only data scientists, but on other levels too. So I'm happy to talk about the roles that we have at StitchFix. And thank you.
All right, thank you. I think there's a lot to be learned about this business model because there are so many areas where the human algorithm interface is important. You know, if you think about things like financial advising, right? There's old school financial advisors who pat you on the back and shake your hand, and then there's, you know, Betterment and Wealthfront that are kind of disrupting them. But, you know, in reality, right, the financial advisory business is going to have to be kind of, in most cases, for high net worth individuals, you're going to have a human, and then the human's going to have to be able to use analytics to offer better advice. And you can see this with doctors, you know, it's probably in entertainment business and lots of different spaces. That's going to be critical.
The one thing I was actually the other day, I went to pharmacy, I'm like, you're next.
Yeah.
The pharmacy is definitely next. Like, we know how the drugs interact with each other. Like, that knowledge should not belong to one person that is at the desk. And you really only need a person for an expert advice. And that's kind of drawing the parallels to StitchFix, but it just became apparent very recently to me. Yes.
Okay, so why don't we have our next speaker kind of get technologically set up, and then you can take questions.